Sit by the shore with me and let the sea carry the noise away. There's a story the tides tell here about a lantern that once waited for the moon. Not for light, but for company. It's a gentle story, one you can drift inside of. The kind that doesn't need to be remembered, only felt. So close your eyes if you want to. Breathe with the waves, and let's begin. The village of Lunareth slept by the sea. A scatter of cottages and winding paths that smelled of salt, bread, and rain. During the day, its harbor hummed with the chatter of fishermen and distant bells. But at night, the world shrank to whispers, to footsteps softened by sand, and the hush of tide against a stone. On the farthest pier, where the wind forgot to bite, there stood a single lantern. It had hung there longer than anyone could remember. A small globe of brass and glass, tended by gentle hands. They said the lantern burned not for ships, but for the moon herself. Every evening, as the first stars climbed into the dusk, the keeper of that lantern, an old soul named Mirren, would walk down the wooden pier, coat flapping softly, and light the flame with care. There, he would whisper, watching it bloom against the dark. So she doesn't feel alone tonight. And though no one else could see it, the moon, round and quiet and silver, seemed to lean just a little closer whenever Mirren lit the lampen's heart. That's where our story begins. In the hush between the sea and the stars, where one small light waits for another. The pier stretched into the sea like a quiet promise. Planks weathered by time, silvered by the salt wind. Each evening, when the sun folded itself into the horizon, Mirren would walk its length with careful, unhurried steps. He was not a tall man, nor particularly old, though the sea had kissed him into something gentler than age. His hands were lined from years of tending to small, breakable things. Lamps, ropes, shells he sometimes mended for the village children. In the daylight, few noticed him. He moved through the world like someone who had learned not to disturb it, content to watch, to listen, to care quietly for what others forgot. But when dusk came, when that blue hour deepened and the first star brushed the water, Mirren belonged to the night. He'd stop by the bakery, still warm with the scent of bread and honey, and exchange a nod with the baker's wife. She'd hand him a small bundle, a heel of loaf, maybe a jar of broth. For the watch, she'd say softly, and he'd smile, tuck it away, and continue down the cobblestones toward the sea. The village lamps blinked to life, one by one, pale halos against the growing dark, yet none shone as far as the lantern. Mirren reached it just as the last of the light faded. The brass casing caught the faintest glimmer of the first star. He opened its tiny door, struck the match, and paused. For a moment, everything held still. The match hissed softly, a single breath of fire, and the lantern bloomed with golden life. "There," he whispered. The sea shimmered in reply, carrying his voice across the water. Somewhere beyond, the moon began to rise. Mirren sat at the edge of the pier, legs crossed, eyes half closed. He didn't light the lantern for the ships, though travelers sometimes thanked him for it. He lit it for the company, for the idea that somewhere out there, in that wide and restless sky, the moon might feel less alone. The villagers thought it was just an old superstition, but Mirren had seen things once. Small, quiet miracles the sea offered only to those who stayed up late enough to notice. Like the time the waves spelled out his name in foam, or the night he swore he saw the moon blink. He smiled at the memory, resting his chin in his hand. The flame in the lantern swayed softly, as if breathing with him. "You came early tonight," he murmured to the horizon. The moon was half risen now, round and white, like a pearl cupped in the palm of the sky. Its reflection wavered across the water, touching the pier like a silver path. "I've kept it warm for you," he said. The sea sighed in answer, and the lantern glowed a little brighter. Then, as it always did, the night began to hum, a low, steady lullaby of water, wood, and faraway wind chimes. And Mirren closed his eyes, listening. The tide had turned glass smooth, and a thin veil of fog began to unfurl from the horizon, slow and deliberate, like a curtain drawn to hush the world. Mirren stayed where he was, shoulders wrapped in his wool shawl, the lantern glowing like a small sun cupped between his palms. Fog had its own music here. The creak of the mooring posts softened. The sea's breath became almost tender. Sometimes, when the fog grew thick enough, it muffled even the sound of thought. Tonight, though, something stirred within it. Not a ship. He would have heard the oars. Not the call of the gulls either. It was lighter, as if the mist itself was humming back to him. Mirren tilted his head. The lantern's flame wavered, and for a moment he thought he saw movement just beyond its glow. The faint outline of a figure where the sea met the fog. He blinked. The figure didn't vanish. It only shimmered, like moonlight trapped in water. "Ah," he whispered, smiling faintly. "So you've decided to visit me properly, then?" He had spoken to the moon so often over the years that he no longer expected her to answer. Yet tonight, it seemed she had. The fog parted just enough to reveal a shape, stepping forward. Not solid, not entirely light, but something in between. A girl, or rather, the idea of one. Her dress looked made of mist, and her hair floated in slow motion, silver as starlight. Where feet touched the pier, the planks stayed dry. Mirren rose slowly, as if afraid to wake from a dream. You shouldn't be out in this weather, he said softly. Are you? Yes, she answered before he could finish. The one you talked to. The moonlight rippled across her face, faint and shifting, like the sea reflected in her skin. I thought you'd never notice me, he whispered. I always notice you, she said, but it's hard for the sky to touch the shore. He smiled, eyes wet in the lantern's glow. Then I'll keep the light burning, so you always know where I am.
Then he closed his eyes, the flame painting gold on his eyelids, the rhythm of the tide sinking with his heartbeat. Slow, even, steady, and far above, the moon hung lower than it had in years. Morning never arrived all at once in the seaside village. It drifted in like a secret, pale light touching rooftops, the scent of salt bread rising from the baker's windows, gulls calling in half-hearted yawns. But that morning when Mirren walked to the shoreline, he found something the sea had left for him, a small glass bottle, sealed with a cork and bound in a thin ribbon of silver thread. Inside a folded scrap of parchment. He turned it over in his hands, smiling at the thought. You're a clever one, he whispered. Sitting on the cool sand, he pried the cork loose, careful not to spill even a grain of salt water onto the page. The parchment unfolded itself like it remembered how. The writing was soft, not ink, but something like moonlight caught in words. It shimmered faintly before fading into visibility. Thank you for the light. Just that. Myron laughed under his breath, heart lifting like the tide. You're welcome, he said to no one, or perhaps to the sky. From that day forward, the bottles began to appear whenever the moon was full. Some contained a single phrase, the sea dreams of you. Another simply said, I remember your hands. Once, there was a tiny pressed petal inside, silver and translucent, unlike any flower that grew on land. He kept it in a locket around his neck. The villagers began to notice his small smiles, the faraway glint in his eyes. He's talking to ghosts again, they'd whisper, half teasing, half afraid. But Mirren didn't mind. And then, one misted dawn, he awoke to the sound of something tapping at his door. Not knocking, tapping, like glass against wood. He opened it to find a jar resting on the step, dripping with dew, inside the same silver thread. The note read, When I am gone, look not to the sky, but to the sea. I have left pieces of myself there for you. Myron pressed the note to his chest, eyes stinging softly. Then I'll find you, he whispered. The tide outside shimmered, calm and endless, as though listening. The evening came wrapped in a velvet stillness. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that breathes, alive, patient, expectant. Myron climbed the narrow hill behind his cottage, where wild lavender brushed his ankles, and the air tasted faintly of salt and rain. In his hands he carried the lantern, his old, faithful friend. Below him, the sea stretched out like a sheet of glass. The horizon shimmered with a strange, silvery haze, as though the moon had spilled herself across the water. He descended slowly, feet tracing the soft path down to the shore. As he reached the water's edge, the tide brushed his boots with a glow that lingered, then faded. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Are you there?" The sea responded not with words, but movement. A long pulse of light that rolled outward as if something deep below had smiled. He set the lantern on the sand. The flame flickered, then steadied, burning in rhythm with the luminous tide. A thought came to him, not a sound, but a presence in the air, as though the world itself was breathing through him. "You kept me alive." His heart swelled. He didn't ask who spoke. He didn't need to. And now, the voice continued, "I'll keep you." The waves drew closer, glowing brighter now. Around his ankles, the water shimmered, not cold, but warm, like silk. The lantern light stretched toward it, merging until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. "When I am gone," he whispered, recalling her words, "look not to the sky." The waves answered softly, carrying the rest of the sentence back to him. But to the sea? And then, for just a heartbeat, he saw her, a figure within the glow, woven from light and water, her hair floating like silver threads, her eyes full of quiet knowing. She raised a hand and the lantern flame leaned toward her. Mirren exhaled. There was no fear, only peace. The wind moved through his hair. The sea touched his knees, and the night folded around him like a promise kept. He closed his eyes. The world tilted gently, and for a moment it felt as if he were weightless, floating between sky and sea, held by both. When he opened them again, the figure was gone. The tide had receded, leaving behind soft, glowing trails that pulsed once, twice, and faded. The lantern still burned beside him, steady and golden. He picked it up, held it close to his chest, and whispered, "Then I'll keep your light too." The village slept. The sea continued its endless song, rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Mirren walked slowly along the shore, the lantern swaying in his hand. Each step pressed into the soft sand, leaving marks that the tide would kiss away. Above him the moon hung low, casting silver light over the rolling waves, a glow that reached through the night, through the fog, through the quiet. And Mirren let himself walk. Let the wind brush his cheeks. Let the salt in the air remind him of time passing softly, unhurried. He thought of the moon. He thought of the figure in the tide. He thought of the letters that floated across the waves. And he let all of it drift. The tide licked the edges of the pier. The lantern glowed steadily. You can let your thoughts drift too, like the lantern, like the waves, like the soft silver glow stretching across the sea. In, out each breath slower than the last, each blink softer. The moon watches, the sea hums. The stars shimmer. The wind sighs. The tide rocks softly against the shore. Nothing needs to be done tonight. Nothing needs to be remembered. Just breathe with the waves. The lantern flickers. The sea glows faintly. The moon leans closer, a quiet friend in the sky. And slowly, 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 your eyes feel heavy. Your body feels weightless. Your thoughts float like clouds over the silver water. Every wave carries you further and yet holds you safe. Every flicker of the lantern reminds you you are not alone. And the night, the endless night, wraps you in its gentle arms. Sleep. Good night.